Hello, I'm Melissa Greiken, the Restoration Ecologist with Land Conservancy of McHenry County. We are a non-governmental not-for-profit land trust that preserves and restores land in Illinois. Today, I'll be taking you on a virtual spring wildflower ID hike at Ryders Woods in Woodstock, Illinois. As I walk the trails today, I'll be pointing out a lot of the interesting plants that I see. Most are in full bloom right now, some will be blooming very shortly, and some of them have actually already finished blooming for the year. So there's your incentive to get on out next April and go for a hike. As I see the plants, I'll be pointing out some key identifying features, some fun facts, and I'll also be putting little signs by a lot of them so that you can all watch this video and then come on out to Ryders Woods and practice your newfound ID skills. The whole hike should take about 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, let's get started. Here we are at Ryders Woods in Woodstock, a 22-acre oak woodland. We're pretty lucky to have this piece of nature right here in our town. It has a pretty interesting history. Over the decades, various garden clubs have come out and introduced some non-native plants, like daffodils and the invasive lily of the valley. And then in the 90s, this woods actually was almost entirely a dense thicket of buckthorn. We've been restoring the woods for quite some time now, and we're very fortunate that so many of our beautiful native wildflowers are still out here. For the hike today, we will be starting at the kiosk near the parking lot, following the trail that goes straight back, and then taking all right-hand turns, which should lead you right back to the parking lot. And right here, only about 50 feet from the kiosk, is a plant that I actually didn't make a sign for because I didn't know we'd see it today. But this here is called pussy toes. This is one of our more uncommon prairie, savanna, and woodland plants. And it's actually full bloom right now. These little tufts of white hair are about all that it does. And you can see that the stems are really fuzzy, as well as the silvery leaves that are on the ground. The whole plant is very, very fuzzy. And this is full grown. It stays under a foot tall. This plant over here is called Solomon seal and is distinguished by this long unbranched stem with leaves spaced all along it. Ryders Woods has 3 different species of Solomon seal. What's called Solomon seal, and then false Solomon seal, and starry false Solomon seal. The difference between them depends on where the flowers form on the plant. In the case of the false Solomon seals, the flowers will come out of the terminal end of the plant, or just the tip right here. This one, if you look closely, you can actually see there's a flower starting to form out of the axil of the leaves. So this one is Solomon seal. The flowers are a lot more showy on the false Solomon seals. They tend to have starry white-shaped flowers. And the Solomon seal has kind of a bell-shaped yellow flower. These plants actually are more showy in the fall when the berries start to form on them, and they'll either get bright red berries if they're a false Solomon seal, or blueberries if they are a Solomon seal. So be sure to come on out back to Ryders in the fall and check them out. This plant here, bloodroot, is one of those plants that have already finished blooming for the year. You can just see a little bit of the flower remnant down at the base. I did take a video from earlier in the year, and these guys have a perfectly white flower with the yellow inside. And you can see down below, its leaves are actually wrapped around the stem right here. And off to the trail to the left is a patch of Virginia bluebells. These plants are very recognizable by their spectacular blue bell-shaped flowers. If you reach out and you touch the leaves, you'll find that they're actually quite rubbery. Bluebells are true spring ephemerals, ephemeral meaning lasting only for a short time. So this life cycle takes advantage of the point in time in the woods when the temperatures are high, but native trees like our oaks don't have leaves on them yet. So the plants will come out and bloom early in spring, set seed, and then go completely dormant as a bulb by summertime, much like tulips. Over here behind the bench, you'll find a nice patch of one of our native buttercups. This one is early buttercup, a reference to the fact that it flowers earlier than our other buttercups. This plant is easily distinguished by the little 5-petaled yellow flowers and then these deeply divided leaves here. Here's a nice patch of geranium, and although they're typically blooming by the time we give this hike, you can just barely see these flower buds here that are just starting to form. They'll probably be blooming in another week or two. Geraniums will get about 2 to 3 times as tall as this. They can actually start to get quite tall. Looks like this one was nibbled on by rabbits a little bit, which is probably keeping the height down. It's pretty distinct by this cleft leaf right here that they call palmately lobed. So if you think about like the palm of your splayed hand, that kind of resembles the shape of the leaf there. The flowers are quite showy. They'll be pink and about 1 inch across. This distinctive plant here is called jack-in-the-pulpit. It's a member of the Asarum family, which have this unique flowering shape called a spathe and a spadix. So the actual flowers are way down inside of this tube, down in there. You can see where it gets the name jack-in-the-pulpit. I guess somebody thought that guy's name right there is Jack, and that's his little pulpit that he's sitting in. Besides the flower, they also have a pretty distinct 3-lobed leaf here, and this leaf can actually grow to be quite tall. I've seen some that, geez, probably are almost reaching like 2.5 feet tall. This is another flower that is quite showy in the fall. The seeds develop in these fleshy clumps of red berries that just really seem to pop. Over here is a plant called trout lily. I actually don't have a sign for this one either because I didn't know we'd be running across it, but it's right across the trail from Dame's Rocket, which we'll talk about next. This plant is most readily identified by its single fleshy leaf with that mottled pattern that some people think looks like a brook trout, hence the name trout lily. This plant is already done blooming for the year, but it has a really nice looking downward facing white flower that kind of reminds me of a lampshade. The petals are strongly recurved and point almost all the way back up to the sky. It's a really neat flower. The plant can form dense colonies through an underground root system that people call rhizomes. And as promised, here's Dame's Rocket. Unfortunately, there are plenty of invasive species present throughout Ryders Woods. 2 of our worst invasive wildflowers are Dame's Rocket here and garlic mustard. Both of these plants are part of the mustard family, which are known for having 4-petaled flowers and long skinny seed pods. Invasive species are moved from place to place for a variety of reasons, whether people are using them as a food source or, like this one, Dame's Rocket, if they think they're pretty, so they plant them in their garden, or sometimes they're just brought in completely accidentally. Either way, a few of our non-native plants turn out to be very well adapted to our local climate, and any factors that would have kept them in balance in their native range are absent. So they grow pretty much uncontrollably here and take over. Dame's Rocket actually really does have a pretty flower. I will admit that. It is a large 4-petaled flower that can range anywhere in color from white to a deep purple. So because it's so pretty, some people may object to the fact that it is invasive and should be removed, but it does cause damage to our native ecosystems. Dame's rocket is mostly distinguished, besides the flower, by those relatively large, very hairy leaves and the stalks. I think you should be able to see how hairy the stems are from this video. Sometimes it's confused with garden phlox, which is a pretty much native plant. And garden phlox has 5-petal flowers and opposite leaves. Right down the hill from the dame's rocket is this garlic mustard. If you can't tell, I haven't gotten around to managing this unit yet, which is why all the invasive species are congregated here. Garlic mustard is most easily identified by these white flowers here they're pretty small. They're not very showy, but they are four-petaled. Another key identifying feature is the texture of this leaf. It's pretty crinkly, almost like if you imagine laundry that's been sitting in the laundry basket too long. Garlic mustard is a biennial rather than a perennial. Biennial meaning that it only lives for 2 years. The first year, it forms a basal rosette, which just means a clump of leaves near the ground. The second year, it forms these flowering stalks, and pretty shortly, it'll set seed and die. So we focus most of our control on the second-year plants. We just pull them up and discard them before they can form seed and spread more. Here is a patch of wild ginger, one of my absolute favorite spring wildflowers. Wild ginger oftentimes forms these dense colonies of soft, fuzzy, heart-shaped leaves, and it stays under about 6 inches tall. The really neat thing about this colony is that it's actually full bloom right now, but you'd never know it just from walking past. So the blooms are found at the way base of the plant here. It's those triangular maroon-shaped bulbs right there. Many of our earliest blooming plants have either maroon-colored flowers or flowers with a pretty foul odor, like if you guys are familiar with skunk cabbage. That's because in the early springtime, these plants are trying to attract gnats and little flies and other pollinators that come out really, really early. So they're trying to resemble carrion so that they trick the gnats into visiting the flowers. Here's a plant that some of you may know. This is one of our trilliums. There are several species of trilliums in Illinois, but they all seem to share the same features of a 3-parted leaf and a 3-petaled flower. This species, Prairie Trillium, is the most common species in our area. It's actually named after its abundance in Illinois, the prairie state, rather than the ecosystem that it lives in. It can be distinguished from other trillium species by this mottled appearance of its leaf, much like the trout lily had. This blue flower down here is common wood violet. This is actually the same species of violet that grows in a lot of people's yards, and it's also the state flower of Illinois. Although this particular violet's common, there's several different species of violets that grow in our area, and they can grow in all different kinds of habitats, prairies, woodlands, and wetlands. And some of the species of violets around here are actually quite rare, and I believe some are endangered. So even though this species is very common, I think it bears mention because violets are just absolutely gorgeous flowers, and they're a neat source of early spring pollen for bumblebees. And actually, just down the trail from the Trillium, if you look just past it on the left-hand side of the trail, there's also some yellow violets, which are a lot less common than our common blue violets. Here at the top of the hill is an astounding colony of rue anemone and pen sedge growing together. Rue anemone are these little white flowers here. The whole plant is very small and very delicate. It stays under a foot tall. So it's most distinguished by this single slender stalk, which then forms a whorl of these three-lobed leaves and these white flowers with a greenish yellowish center. The pen sedge is this grassy looking plant here. So sedges are an amazing plant. Sedges are part of a plant group called graminoids that's made up of sedges, rushes, and grasses. The differences between those three plants are based on certain flower, seed, and other general characteristics. But in my opinion, sedges tend to look a lot more fine and delicate than a grass would. Sedges are also a very diverse group of plants, with around 100 different species occurring around here, just in the genus Carex alone. The sedges occur in all kinds of different habitats. They'll grow in woodlands, prairies. They even have a whole ecosystem named after them in wetlands, sedge meadows. This woodland sedge is fairly common in our county. This is called pen sedge or common oak sedge. So this spreads by rhizome, and it forms these nice colonies that stay also under a foot tall. So it looks really great mixed in here with all of the rue anemone. They do flower, but to notice the flowers, you'll have to get quite close, and it's mostly finished flowering for the year. The flowers are really, really small, but they are quite beautiful if you can get up close and appreciate them. You can tell the male flowers, the anthers, by the little tuft of yellow hair up on top, and the female flowers, the stigmas, which are the white parts down below. Over here, in the middle of this patch of invasive lily of the valley, we have a whole grove of hepatica. This is another one of our earlier spring blooms, so we missed the blooming season this year. Get out there next April and check it out, though. You can still see the remains of last year's flower, or this spring's flowering stalks. So that's the seed pod right there. And it's pretty much probably ready to go. Not quite yet, otherwise the seeds would be falling off the stalk. But you can tell this plant from the three-lobed leaf. That's how it gets its name. They think that the lobes on the hepatica leaf resemble the lobes of a human liver. Earlier in the spring, it's also really, really fuzzy. It's starting to kind of lose its fuzz, but you can still see some fine hairs all along the base of the leaf and the stalk there. And finally, the last plant on today's hike is one that some of you will be able to recognize. This one's called mayapple. Mayapples are pretty distinctive by these odd umbrella-shaped plants. They're not quite in bloom yet, but if you can see, I'll pan over here. This plant, where it splits, where the stalk splits, there's the little flower bud, and that's going to form a really gorgeous white large flower. It's kind of another one of those neat plants that if you're just walking past up on top, you might never notice the flower. You kind of have to get down, like I'm sitting on my knees right now. But just a gorgeous plant. Thanks for joining me today for our virtual spring wildflower hike, and now it's your turn to come on out to Ryders Woods and identify these plants on your own. If you liked the video, feel free to donate so that we can keep preserving awesome places like this.